Greetings, everybody. Out to sea. Let's keep talking about Ibogaine. And I've done a few videos touching a bit on the experience I had, but I've gone more into my experiences once I had started working at the actual clinics. So let's take it way, way back to when I actually learned about it. And I have recorded essentially a trip report that I wrote over a period of 18 months after I initially took Ibogaine. And I've got it all right here in this old red notebook. I hadn't read it for years and started reading it the other day. And it really just reminded me of how brutal the experience was, how intense it was, and just how far out it blew me out there. So I wasn't gonna do this detailed trip report because it's extremely detailed. So Ibogaine, it's generally classified as a psychedelic, but it's more accurately described as a, can't remember how to pronounce it, oneirogen. It's oneirogenic, and this is a Greek word that translates to dream inducing. So Ibogaine is a oneirogenic, a dream inducer. It's not your standard psychedelic. So let's take it way back. How did I even learn about Ibogaine? I want to say it was around the year 2000, and I picked up a Vice magazine. For those who don't know, before Vice was a massive media conglomerate, it was a free monthly magazine that you'd get at the entry to, boutique, clothing stores, record stores. It was cool, it was a good way to find out about music, clothes, drug culture, all of that. So Vice used to be very different. It used to be really cool. So I stumble upon an article written by Gideon Yago in an old Vice magazine, and he's talking about Ibogaine. He reported on going down to one of the OG quasi-clinics in Tijuana, the Ibogaine Association, that was founded and run by Dr. Martin Polanco, one of the OGs in the Ibogaine world. And little did I know, unbeknownst to me when I read this article around the year 2000, that about 8 years down the line, I myself would be taking Ibogaine at the Ibogaine Association, and about 12 years down the line, I would actually be working with Dr. Martin Polanco at his Crossroads Ibogaine Clinic. So I read this article, and being that I was a drug enthusiast and a psychedelic enthusiast, my interest was piqued immediately. An illegal Schedule 1 psychedelic derived from an African root that apparently has the capacity to remove narcotic dependency in people. I read this article, and Gideon Yago, he interviewed some of the clients that were at this Ibogaine quasi-clinic, and they were hardcore junkies, smoking crack, shooting dope, end of the line, hopeless, and the Ibogaine did something for them. Now, it made sense to me that there would be some type of naturally occurring psychedelic that is essentially an antidote to the poppy. A lot of people, when you talk to them about Ibogaine, it's like, well, you're just fighting one drug with another. It's like, no, you don't get it. It's like, well, yeah, but doesn't that make sense though, right? Like, fight fire with fire. So, I researched online. There was some information online. This was pre-YouTube, right? Like around the year 2000. I told some friends about it that were like into natural medicine. We were all interested. I kind of tucked Ibogaine back into my mind and essentially forgot about it. Fast forward 2008. I have become strung out on heroin. I've been in a treatment center. I got clean. I relapsed. And I've been on Suboxone for the better part of 3 years. And while I'm living a seemingly normal life, living with my non-addict girlfriend and working a good job and snowboarding and playing guitar, still, being dependent on Suboxone, it hits something deep in you to where you just know you're not free. You're not truly a free sovereign citizen. I haven't met one person that likes being on their Suboxone. I tried to detox myself. It's very difficult. It takes a very long time. When you have a job, when you're working paycheck to paycheck, getting off of Suboxone is not easy. So, I'm getting ready to do a cold turkey home detox. I scheduled the time off of work. I'd been tapering. I tapered down the Suboxone. I can't remember, but I was tapering. I was low, right? And I'd scheduled about 3 weeks off of work. And I remember I was scared and I was not confident that I was going to be able to make it through it because I was living in Seattle and I mean, Seattle was just wrought with heroin. It's so easy to get there. It's such a hard place to stay clean. So I'm scared, and from out of nowhere, Ibogaine pops into my head. Oh, what was that article I read back in the day about that psychedelic that can get you clean? So I get online. YouTube has emerged, and I find all of these testimonials that seem to be very sincere. People talking about being strung out to the bone, going to Mexico, taking Ibogaine, having a profound psychedelic, life-changing event, and being able to go home and continue with their lives free of the opiate dependency. When I started seeing these videos, I just knew that I had to do this. You know, I'm researching it. There's way more information available than there was when I learned about it initially. I come into contact with Claire at the Ibogaine Association. She had been treated with Ibogaine herself by Martin Planko in the original Ibogaine Association. She ended up buying, you know, the rights to the website from the guy and kind of took over the clinic, right? She ended up changing the name to Pangea Biomedics. So I come into contact with this woman. We're talking on the phone, and you know, I relate to her. I can tell she's real. She's been through it. I know I need to do Ibogaine. Now this thing costs $5,500. It's money I don't have. My family manages to make it happen. So, on the morning of March 17th, 2008, I wake up and I'm in panic. I'm in withdrawal. And that relief. Oh my God, I have my last little quarter piece of tar. I can shoot. I remember when I let the tourniquet go and I can feel the warmth of the heroin hitting me. And the thought, this is the last shot. Famous last words, right? But I don't know though. I'm getting ready to go take Ibogaine, so let's see what happens here. I left early. I got in the cab. It was like 6 a.m. You know, it's dark and dreary in Seattle. I've been doing heroin and oxy for 10 days leading up to the Ibogaine treatment because I was informed that the buprenorphine in the Suboxone is a long-acting synthetic opiate. It binds to the receptors in too strong of a manner, like methadone. The Ibogaine struggles with it. It's more dangerous. You're better off on short-acting opiates. Now, this was certainly the first treatment/detox center I'd ever been in contact with where I was advised to stop taking the Suboxone and start shooting heroin. You know, didn't have to twist my arm that hard. So that's exactly what I did. I fly down to San Diego and I am greeted by a woman with long dark hair. She feeds me a Xanax bar and gives me a hug. We load into a beat up gold Cadillac Escalade with a couple other clients and cross the border into Playa de Tijuana. Now, I was expecting a clinic, right? That's not the case. This is a house in a gated community overlooking the Pacific Ocean, Playa de Tijuana, the beaches of Tijuana, a little nicer. You know, it's in a gated community up on the hill with all the cartel families. The Xanax bar must have done its job pretty good because all I remember is waking up in a bed, it's dark out, and I could tell it smelled different. You know, it was just such a different climate than Seattle. It felt different. It smelled different. The air was different. We were by a busy highway. I can hear cars going by. It's just a white, nondescript room. I'm on a queen-size bed. It's not on a bed frame. It's just on the floor, right? Because, you know, people roll out of the bed and whatnot on Ibogaine. And I come to and I'm sick. And I'm sicker than I've been in years because I've been on Suboxone for like 3 years. I haven't had to experience withdrawal for a very long time. I've been off the subs for a week. I've been as conservative as possible with the heroin and the oxy. I went through like a quarter zip of old school black tar and a few old school 80 milligram oxys. So I'm sick and I'm starting to panic. And then someone arrives to give me the test dose of Ibogaine. So I took the trip report. I wrote down in here, I wrote this over a period of 18 months, and this is a window into what my frame of mind was when I was writing this. You know, the 2 years post Ibogaine, I'm actually clean from opiates. It has done what I intended it to do. So I'm going to read this, and then being that we're like 15 years down the line, it's like, how do I feel about this 15 years down the line, right? Like, where am I now? How do I feel about Ibogaine now? Because when I wrote this, I was evangelical about it, boy. I would tell anybody that would listen, it was the answer to drug addiction. Bottom line, you know, risks be damned. This was the way to go. So here we go. You know, get comfortable because this is long, all right? It took me a while to type this up and clean it up to make it more readable. And this is, I'm nervous, man. This is sensitive stuff. Ibogaine trip report, March 17th, 2008. I was fed an unknown amount of Ibogaine hydrochloride at the Ibogaine Association, aka Pangea Biomedics in Playa de Tijuana. My intention was to end my opiate addiction that had now spanned over 7 years. What I requested, I received. I went through a series of dreamlike visions that spanned a period of 4 days. As with most profound psychedelic experiences, words don't suffice when explaining the ineffable. Similar to typical dreams, not everything made sense. For example, you may be at your grandparents' house, but it's not physically your grandparents' house. Know what I mean? There was a subtle symbolism twined throughout the experience that made it my own. The not making sense made sense. Ibogaine seems to be a window into the mystery of ourselves and this world we find ourselves in. It revealed to me how seamless the transition between life and death truly is. The Ibogaine felt like it was working with me somehow. As I write this, 15 months after the experience, the visions are still clear as day and continue to reveal themselves to me. I'm still learning. On the evening of March 17th, 2008, I found myself lying on a mattress in a blank room on the second floor of a home in a gated community. This was supposed to be a clinic called Pangea Biomedics. It was just a house. By nightfall, I was on my way to the all-too-familiar opiate withdrawal when I was fed a test dose of Ibogaine. After about an hour, my legs stopped hurting. I could feel the Ibogaine moving through me, removing the withdrawal as it did so. This was not yet unpleasant. Upon closing my eyes, there was a vast, dark pool of still, glassy water. Peaceful and calm, a single drop of water fell from the invisible cavern ceiling and sent ripples through the pond. Like in David Lynch's movie Dune, the hidden wells of the desert planet Arrakis. Intervals of a few seconds between, drops kept penetrating the vast, still pond. I became the drop of water and watched myself falling towards the pool, and upon hitting the water I became human again. There was detail and life beneath the water's surface, diving very deep, current pulling me through tunnels and coral at high speed. My eyes open, and there I am, in my blank, nondescript room next to a loud highway, lying in bed, when someone comes to feed me my full flood dose of Ibogaine. Scared, but now feeling that the Ibogaine was actually working, I readily ate the 3 00 capsules packed full of white powder. Suggests I took well over a gram of Ibogaine. Within an hour of taking the full dose, my entire body became numb and tingly. The tingly feeling began to feel and look like thousands of fingers gently beating my flesh. The numbness now went down to the bone. A rather annoying buzzsaw sound, like a skill saw, rang through my ears, and fear consumed me as I realized I could not move or lift my head. This all became quite overwhelming, and I wasn't sure I was going to make it. I'm dying, I thought. Feeling and emotion began to break up as I was crumbling. I saw a great dark void. Invisible lights began growing within it. These lights became a churning ball, and I noticed every single memory of this life was in this ball. Each memory would come to the surface and retreat back inside like a fish jumping out of water. The ball of memories quickly made a drastic change as the memories became blood and human body parts. This concerned me, as I didn't really want this to continue for long. The deepest fears evolved to a feeling of absurdity and embarrassment. It was as though I had come to terms with the reality of a horrific death, and now it was just absurd and kind of embarrassing. Throughout this, I remained vaguely aware of where I was and why. Then that dissolved as well. Now, completely disassociated from myself and reality, a powerful spinning momentum built, and I was in space. The buzzing sound ceased and opened into a clean, smooth whoosh. It's as though the dial on the radio was changed from one channel to another, like I had to go through static to get to the different frequency. Now a vast, quiet stillness. I observed our spinning solar system. It was minuscule. The planets and sun were like marbles, contained inside another orb, just big enough to hold it together. Tiny and vast. Something real yet fake about it. The whole experience was wrought with contradiction. Paradox. Something began to happen as a series of asteroids destroyed each planet one by one until they were gone. Nothing but dust particles remaining. The juxtaposition of terror/absurdity kicked in, and I thought, oh well, what am I to do now? Very slowly, but quickly, each planet reformed from its dust. I witnessed the newly formed system heat and cool, the most beautiful, vibrant color beams emanating from the planets as they cooled. These beams of colored light eventually moved through me, and I was destroyed and reborn with the planets. This event of destruction and rebirth happened again and again and again and again. I could feel these beams of light stripping things out of me, cleaning me. It was now time to go to work. There was a very clear transition from one place to the next, one dream to the next, as though it was broken into chapters. And I did break the visions into chapters. There's 9 of them. Or possibly past lives. Each time there was a transition from one place to the next, one frequency to the next, I'd get an increasingly powerful spinning sensation that would eventually unravel and explode to the next place. It felt like I had to gain momentum in order to travel. Vision 1. A thick tree canopy overhead. I appear in a jungle clearing, and I know that I'm in Africa. The buzzing sound now faint, as though the frequency had been dialed in. The buzzing was now that of insects. A few yards ahead of me, several dark-skinned, naked men standing in a circle. Upon staring at them for a few seconds, one of the men turned to look at me. He let the other men know that I had arrived, and they made space for me to complete the circle. Motioning for me to come over with head nods, I walked over, completed the circle, and saw what they were standing around. There was a circular spring, or a well, about 6 foot in diameter, like a hot tub. The water was rushing counterclockwise, as though draining, though the level stayed consistent, and there were large rocks tumbling around in it. A stone pillar was protruding from the middle of the well, and a giant beating heart appeared on the stone. The beating heart evolved into a large beetle that twittered around on the pillar. I became the heart, and then became the twittering beetle. The men gestured for me to get into the well. I remember being a bit concerned about the tumbling rocks in there, but was fearless and climbed into the water. Upon being fully immersed, I became the water and was cleansed inside and out. There was something familiar about the tumbling stones, but didn't pay too much attention as I knew I had just met Iboga. Vision 2. Hen was the first close friend I had upon moving to Seattle from Arizona when I was 13. I spent a lot of time at his family's house, and he was one of the first people I'd started using drugs with. Together, we progressed from the seemingly innocent weed and psychedelics to the rough beast of narcotics. Hen's family lives in a large, modest yet beautiful baby blue house full of art, books, kids, and pets, not far from Green Lake in Woodland Park. A beautiful place. The family would host community dinners on Tuesday nights, and everyone was welcome. It wasn't a potluck. His mom fed everybody. This is where I appear, at the Tuesday night dinner. What was interesting was that we were in the future. I had already gone through Ibogaine, had recovered, and was clean back in Seattle. I was there to tell Hen about my experience, and to tell him there was hope. See, because I'm the one who introduced Hen to heroin, and the dealer couple I knew, and I'm guilty and ashamed, feel obligated to help, to redeem myself. A couple things stood out as unusual. We seemed to be in an abnormally deep winter for Seattle, and the house and everything outside of it were covered in sparkling ice. It wasn't day and it wasn't night. The light was weird and had darkness to it. Sitting at the large rectangular dinner table, I recognized Hen's cousins, parents, and sisters. There were people unfamiliar to me as well, and I suddenly got the vibe that this time I wasn't welcome. It was in fact Christmas Eve and intended to be a family-only dinner. To not be rude, they tolerated me to stay. The people who I wasn't familiar with turned out to be very wealthy family visiting from Europe. Hen does in fact have wealthy family, but I don't know them, and I don't think they're in Europe. Who knows? We're all gathered around the large table, when it becomes apparent that something is not right with Hen. He had lost all of his teeth from smoking crack, and had them replaced with these black woven wire fangs. There was talk of Hen being possessed, and that they had tried to help him through religious means, to no avail. The wealthy out-of-towners had brought a charm necklace that was now being passed around the table to gawk at. The most precious, rare, hand-sculpted jewels and golds in existence dangled from this necklace, the value turning the family into celebrities. As the necklace was being passed, one of the out-of-town women began to sob in fear, as Hen was levitating with his wire fangs exposed like a ready-to-feed vampire. Everyone else seemed to either ignore or not notice this, and there was impending doom. Meanwhile, dinner was being served. The spread of food was so amazing that I forgot about Hen. His dad was making these vegetable pot pies, pressing an intricate pattern into the crust. My stepdad Greg was in the basement beating a large leather-bound drum that had some sort of great importance in keeping all of this going. I was drawn to these little handmade chocolates that had sparkling green specks of peppermint. The chocolates were the same shapes as the jewels on the charm necklace. I could taste everything and it was amazing. All of a sudden, the clock struck midnight and pastel confetti came raining down with cheers, for Christmas had arrived. Presents were torn open in a wrapping paper explosion, pastel confetti continuing to explode from above. The gifts were ridiculous and absurd in value. There was $1 million check for everybody, like publisher clearinghouse winnings. Everyone was ecstatic. I did not give or receive anything, and this didn't bother me. As quickly as this all happened, it was over. Everybody was upstairs, asleep, as I sat alone in the living room, wrapping paper everywhere. I again noticed the icy twilight outside and seamlessly moved from the inside of the house to a great cathedral outdoors. I was now with Hen and his younger cousins as we walked through gardens of ice alongside this cathedral. This place seemed to be the origin of the darkness possessing Hen. We had to make it through the night at this place and traveled back to his house in the morning. Now things flip upside down, and we're at Westlake Center in downtown Seattle, a block from 3rd and Pike, the Blade, a notorious drug spot. Not there for drugs, though. The wealthy, out-of-town family is scheduled to show the charm necklace to a huge crowd of spectators and paparazzi. The pastel confetti was falling from the sky. There were stands and vendors everywhere selling what appeared to be fancy jewelry and clothing. I knew it all to be fugazi, though. Famous people were being interviewed. Non-famous people were trying to be interviewed. There was something artificial to this whole scene. I was just tagging along. I remember feeling guilty. Guilty because I'd been freed from my addiction and was doing well, while Hen was still dark and lost. I saw times I'd wronged his family. I once stole money from his mom's purse for pot, abused their hospitality, and gave Hen heroin the first time. Vision 3. Like an unraveling top, things spun out of control again and the radio dial was turned to another frequency. I'm in a South American jungle town. Very poor, but beautiful. Homes or shacks were wedged into the sides of the steep hills above this deep valley, very green. I'm a little boy, 5 or 6 maybe. I spend my days wandering the village, always looking for a specific candy, a push-pop Slurpee type drink. I knew everybody in the village. They acknowledged me, and I acknowledged them. I began gambling with the other kids, a scratch card type game, where we'd bet these push-pop candies. This was a turning point. Up until now, it was innocent. Now, all anybody did was gamble. Everyone, the adults now too, gathered in circles of 5 or 6 and put everything on the line. Everyone lost, every time. There was a small group of 8-foot giants who ran the games and controlled all the wealth. Now, we're down in a valley, right? There are these giant boulders wedged into the hills. These giants were the only ones strong enough to manipulate these boulders to keep them from tumbling into the valley, killing everybody. This is where it gets weird. From age 5 to 13, I had these recurring waking nightmares, and this is real, involving these boulders. These waking dreams were sometimes induced by fever when sick, other times for seemingly no reason. In these dreams, I would sleepwalk into the living room of whatever house I was in. I once did this at Hen's uncle's home, and there would be one of these boulders right smack in the middle of the living room, having crushed everything. Panic would set in, as this living room crushing boulder was somehow my fault and responsibility to clean up. Impossible to move. But I had to do something before somebody found out. And someone was coming. When I'd realize I couldn't move the boulder, I'd start crying and freaking out for real until I'd wake somebody up who would find me and shake me until I came to. The last time I had that I was 13, I believe. I'd forgotten about these waking nightmares until this Ibogaine vision. The stones tumbling around in the well were the same stones, but smaller. The jungle village quickly deteriorated into squalor and all innocence was corrupted as the games became increasingly desperate. Groups of people everywhere, day and night, gambling their livelihood away. This place was greens, browns, and yellows. This has been hard to admit for one reason or another, but I believe this to be a fragment of a past life. Vision 4. I get spun up, unwound at light speed, and I'm an old man in the desert. This place had a similar vibe to the jungle village when I was a little boy in South America, but I've now seamlessly moved across the planet to a desert in the Middle East. I know this. The patterns here are different than in the jungle. There is a dark twilight in the daytime. Like in the valley of the jungle village, this place began in innocence and quickly got out of hand. I remember fleeing one village for another with a group of people from my village. Through rolling desert hills we walked, starving, dehydrated, and scared. We seemed to be steadily moving downhill. Scrap metal and all kinds of post-apocalyptic debris began appearing in the sand. The desert plains turning into wastelands. Crawling over chicken wire, desperate, I can feel pain. Everybody else from my village perished, and it was my fault. This place was yellows, oranges, reds, and blacks. Pretty soon, 2, 3, and 4-story clay and brick apartments began to sparsely pop up, like doll houses. The structures only had 3 walls, the front wall missing and wind eroded, exposing the inhabitants. There were no doors or stairs to enter the one-room studios of the dwellers, I call them. When entering the dwellings, I would just be there all of a sudden. There was a dirty, brothel-like feel to all of this. Tapestries and old frayed Persian rugs flowing all over. We felt as though we'd lost our dignity, but we've accepted this and are no longer ashamed. This place is where shame lives. Upon entering one of the dwellings, I became a rotating, spinning diode. It's the only way I can explain it. Like what you see on a computer chipboard. Raw, condensed energy just spinning. The dweller right there with me, supporting me as I turned, gaining momentum. I reached the breaking point, and innocence was lost as chaos prevailed. A cityscape of lights, a labyrinth of an old desert city opens up to me from some floors off the ground. I'm on a large balcony looking over this bustling city. It is nighttime, and I know that I am still in ancient Middle East. The diode that I became in the dwelling, the tiny tubular piece with yellow rings on computer chipboards, it was a new drug that everybody was addicted to. It was edible and gave you a crack-like electric rush that made everything okay. Everyone had become a zombie-like creature whose only motivation was to get more. What's rich was that these diodes were free and everywhere, raining from the sky actually. The ground was covered in them. All you had to do was reach down every few seconds and grab more. Any semblance of a functioning society was gone. I was also hopelessly addicted. Addicted to something that I created and seemed to have more awareness of than others. I knew I didn't want this. I continued roaming the land, now a Vegas-type post-apocalyptic landscape, but still in the desert. I entered other homes and ate diodes. Upon learning that the diode addiction had gone global, and there was a tiny population of humans who hadn't succumbed to it, I found myself striving to be clean of the diodes and with the last functioning humans. And I had some commentary later on. This is interesting. My heroin addiction was of my own doing, my own responsibility, something I chose, whether I knew it or not. In retrospect, I feel my heroin addiction led me to a place that forced me to ask myself, what is freedom and honesty really? I enslaved myself, had to choose if I was to live or die. Neither are easy routes, both are living realms. In heroin addiction, I felt completely stuck, living in constant repeat. Just couldn't pull myself from it, or not for long. This was written 6 months post Ibogaine, and I'm experiencing immense growth. This one was horrific. Absolute sheer terror, horror. This was difficult, and continues to be so in a way. Vision 5. It is exactly 15 months since the Ibogaine, and just now I write this. This dream involved my girlfriend and her family. In this horror show, I was still hopelessly strung out on heroin. I had proposed, and we were to get married. This all happened very quickly. Her mother arranged a celebration at her grandfather's home. In real life, her grandfather had already passed, and I never met him. So I'm a cook, right? And anytime there's a celebration, I typically cook lots of food. Put a lot of effort in, you know? In this vision, I go to the store to buy produce, meat, etc. for this meal. My engagement celebration meal. Upon getting to Safeway, not a store I usually go to for quality, I realize I'm dope sick, and the money I have needs to go to heroin. Instead of buying all the good things I planned on for my mise en place, I got this horrid pastel discount pre-made birthday cake. The plastic cover. The frosting was sweating, and it looked old and beat up, had the discount sticker and all, yellow and sickly Pepto pink. Then I went to the warming box by the deli and store exit and got a pre-cooked roast turkey that looked as though it had already been eaten. A carcass remained. To top things off, I presented a toy ring with the horror show excuse for a meal. A true nightmare. We're there in a cornfield and things spin out of control again. And I have commentary. This went deep into my feeling of inadequacy and failure. The shame, guilt, fear, and failure was so palpable here. Ibogaine can mess with your relationships, and it's not always positive. Now that final sentence, Ibogaine can mess with your relationships, and it's not always positive, that's my current opinion. So here we go. Vision 6. This event was really fucking scary. It involved my old and influential friend, John, aka FroJ, rest in peace, FroJ, who I sold acid with and got strung out with. He knew I was going to take Ibogaine and had gotten me the heroin the week before I left. He sent me down with a heady wire wrap pendant to wear. We appear at this sports bar on the east side we used to go to with his meth and cocaine dealing roommate Davey. It was different this time though. It was more like a dark cave. Sitting at our table, we started smoking crack off of these weird little thin sheets of glass. It was me, Davey, and a couple other really sketchy guys I didn't know. We were all getting close to death high. I could feel my heart beating and ready to explode. For all I know, it may have been for real. This went on for a while. before it got dark outside and the spinning began. Now, John and I are on the other side of town in the crack ghetto of the Central District. Just me and him. The neighborhood descended into a wasteland of concrete rubble that used to be crack projects. The buildings were crumbling to the ground and it looked like an atom bomb had hit. All that was left was a landscape of rubble and angry baseheads. They knew I didn't belong and were threatening towards me, lunging at me, showing their broken teeth. John had chosen this reality and had no intention of leaving, so we found our own pile of concrete rubble and sat. I didn't want base anymore, but John proceeded to smoke himself into a hellish oblivion, collapsed lungs. Every now and again, someone looking like Chud, shout out if you know Chud, 80s kids, would come threaten me or try to steal something. As John entered a psychotic state, he began trying to eat chunks of the concrete rubble, breaking his teeth violently. When John regained consciousness and realized what he had done, he told me there was no point in him leaving this place. I felt we were in this crack hell a whole night. Slowly it turned from dark to the eerie twilight, and I was able to walk out of there and leave. I had to make it through the night before I could go. Kind of a recurring theme, having to make it through the night. Dark night of the soul, sure thing. This is an odd parallel. This is some commentary I wrote. This is an odd parallel concerning the vision with Hen, who also lost his teeth to crack. Also, I felt I did Hen wrong, where John did me wrong. Juxtaposition. After Ibogaine, it became apparent that I did indeed have serious dental problems, and had all 4 bottom molars pulled 3 months post-Ibogaine. And I did it with no opiate painkillers, man. That was insane. It actually was totally manageable. I mean, they numbed me up and everything, but no opiates for that oral surgery. Vision 7. Spun like a top again. I'm now a young man working in a street market as a cook. We were on cobblestone roads. There were horses and carriages. Felt like it was early 1800s. I had a stand and was preparing this baked eggplant dish and some kind of beef and cabbage. Food I've never made in my life. I knew this to be a past life. I think these are all past lives. I was involved in an ongoing dispute with my neighbor in the market, another cook. This place seemed very familiar. It smelled familiar as I was home. Vision 8. I have a deep old history with LSD. This one was enjoyable. I saw myself working as a chemist in the Sandoz laboratories of Switzerland when LSD was invented. Me and other chemists were experimenting with the LSD, eating it, and having the most pure, innocent, and beautiful experiences you can imagine. Pure bliss. At one point, I became LSD, and in blues, whites, clears, and blacks. Mainly, though, a bouncing blue ball in a liquid grid. Energy builds and releases. There were no borders. Oh, this felt so good, man. Vision 9. This is it. Brief in comparison, as I think I'm starting to come back to reality here. This was dense as any trip, though, and wrought with infinity. Don't get me wrong, but I think I know I'm coming back at this point. Know what I mean? A flat yellow plane of yellow and gold that twisted into a great glowing and twinkling rope. Great civilizations like this one rose and fell, rose and fell, rose and fell. It was beautiful, grand, and felt as though I had been shown something of true history and importance. Whatever it was of such beauty that it's what every artist strives to accomplish and never can. Holy smokes, man. That's what happened when I was fed a flood dose of Ibogaine hydrochloride coming out of a hardcore opiate addiction. Nowadays, when you contact responsible Ibogaine clinics, they're telling you to be off of the Suboxone for like at least a month or longer. We know now that it's just not effective and it's hard on the body. Now, so I was given the test dose, the big flood dose. I'm assuming, 20-ish milligrams per kilogram. This is when they were just walloping people, killing kids. Dosing is done a little bit more low and slow now due to all the deaths. But this was in the Stone Ages where we were just getting walloped. Now, about 2 days in, I was complaining about having remaining withdrawal, which I did because we did it wrong. I was coming off Suboxone. So this woman decides to give me a big old booster Ibogaine. I remember it was a packed double O capsule. You fit 500 milligrams in those. Who knows what it was? Could have been 300, 400, 500. Who knows? All I know is that that's the one that threw me over the edge. I think after the initial flood dose, I had the vision of like the well in Africa and the solar system being destroyed. But it was after I was overdosed with the booster that I had just those horrific nightmares that, they're like heroin nightmares on Ibogaine is what it was. So man, that's what happened. That's what I saw. And it removed my craving for opiates. Now, they told me I almost died. I believe I had a stroke because I went aphasic and I couldn't talk anymore. They had to keep me. I was supposed to leave on a Friday. I wasn't capable of getting on a plane. So they kept me a couple extra days. The doctor had to write a letter to the airport saying to put me on a plane. I had an exemption because I almost died. Now, at one point, the nurse was supposed to be watching me. I'm in and out of consciousness. Sometimes I'm up and walking around. Other times I'm in bed. I'm in and out of consciousness. It's like 5 in the morning. I decide I want to take a shower. I go and get into a freezing cold shower. It's Tijuana. The water's freezing. And the nurse, who is supposed to be watching me, is asleep. When they're not asleep, they're smoking cigarettes, whatever. A couple hours go by before I'm found in the freezing cold shower. I knew I needed to get out of there. It hurt, but I couldn't move. I couldn't. I was frozen, literally. I guess I gave myself some hypothermia. After that, I remember being in a bed, and they're trying to inject me with God knows what. They're giving me blue 10 milligram Valiums. I knew I was going to die. I thought I did. There were points when I was conscious, I thought to myself, I've been poisoned. So it's been almost 15 years, and here I am, and I'm back on Suboxone, the drug I was on that I had attempted to get off of using the Ibogaine. There aren't too many long-term Ibogaine follow-up videos. The vast majority of the testimonials are done a week after the person has taken the Ibogaine. They're still at the treatment center. The director of the center has coerced them into making a video so that it looks good and they get more clients or more trusted. You don't see too many, 15-year updates. So, where am I at now? How do I feel? Well, I'm dependent on a tapering dose of Suboxone, and I took Ibogaine to get off of Suboxone. I've taken Ibogaine several more times since that initial flood dose because I was working with it, right? I had access to it. I basically became a Ibogaine dealer or provider or caretaker, whatever you want to call it, I've done extensive microdosing with the raw iboga root bark, the total alkaloid extract. I've done several Ibogaine hydrochloride doses ranging from 200 milligrams upwards of 1,000 milligrams. I went down and took another flood at Sandy's in like 2015. Rest in peace, Sandy. A lot of rest in pieces out here. A lot of these people I know are dead. You know what I mean? So by 2012, I'm chipping on heroin. I'm messing around. And in the back of my mind, I've got Ibogaine, right? I'm invincible. I've figured out the trick. I can chip, and if I get a little sick, take a little bit of Ibogaine, and I'm all good, right? Right? I wrote down some of the side effects here of Ibogaine, and it has some interesting ones, very unique side effects. So I was obsessed with my visions. All of these visions. What's interesting is that while you're on the Ibogaine, you're kind of detached and able to view it kind of objectively, like, oh, look at that horror and pain of suffering. Look at all that happening. You're kind of detached, right? But then coming out of it and back to reality, I see it all as totally subjective. Like, it's talking to me. Iboga's talking to me, bro. paint my face with some red and white clay, do a little bouiti dance. I went way down the rabbit hole, and I felt like this stuff has to make sense. There has to be some type of sense in it. It can't just be all for nothing, right? It can't just be that I lost my mind and almost died and probably had a stroke and went aphasic. And, it's not just simply I got poisoned on a drug when I was desperate and trying to detox. There has to be something really valuable and spiritual here, right? There has to be some meaning, damn it. And, I don't think there fucking is, So I was obsessed with my visions. I felt it necessary for others to experience it. Now, this is something that I've seen happen with a lot of people who take Ibogaine, the need and desire to give it to others. You think it's this altruistic thing, I'm helping others, oh, I have something to offer, take this near lethal voodoo drug from West Africa and see what it does, brother. I came to find not everybody has these type of experiences. And I read an article by a doctor talking about the psychology of psychedelics and how some people are just more prone to the spiritual experience. I find that interesting. I feel that I'm one of those people that's a seeker, and I'm just prone to these out to sea experiences, where maybe I'm putting things together where I shouldn't be. And if I would have been able to just walk away from this and be like, whew, that was close. Almost fucking died on some voodoo medicine in Tijuana, but I lived, and it did something to my opioid receptors. I'll give it that. The Ibogaine most definitely does something where it removes craving and withdrawal to opiates. But it does a whole lot of other things that are a huge mystery. I don't know if I became possessed by the spirit of Iboga. Overdoses of Ibogaine are known to do damage to brain cells. They're called like the Purkinje cells or something. I know I'm pronouncing that improperly. But it has been proven that overdoses of Ibogaine do brain damage. And ever since I took it, sometimes I stutter. Sometimes I trip on my words. Sometimes that Broca's aphasia I experienced for 2 days while I was there, where I knew what I wanted to say, I saw my words, but I couldn't say them. I got a little touch of that, man. I think I had a stroke. I think it gave me a little bit of brain damage. I think I'm lucky to be alive. So it made me think I've accessed something rare and important that others haven't, right? So it put me into this very narcissistic place. Like, I've been to the astral plane of Ibogaine, brother. Have you? No, I didn't think so. So there's no way you can know, right? Turn me into a real narcissist. I'm out here thinking my mind is blasted wide open, and I'm actually quite close-minded. I became convinced that my hallucinations were real and somehow had more meaning than this reality right here. Looking back 15 years later, it was heroin nightmares. It was heroin nightmares accentuated by the most powerful, dream-inducing psychedelic on the planet. I've done it all, man. 5-MeO-DMT, NN-DMT, 3 ayahuasca ceremonies, puddles of LSD, eating raw psilocybe cyanescens out of the ground, ayahuasca, 2CB, all types of tryptamines and psychedelic amphetamines. Done it all, boy. Ibogaine, it's a whole other trip. I don't recommend it. I don't wish it on anybody. I felt like there were times where the only reason I wasn't relapsing post-Ibogaine was because I was so terrified of the thought of having to do that again, because I came to believe that the only way to get off of drugs was with Ibogaine. Something my good buddy Ryan's dad told me, a young man I met in Tijuana. If you're watching, Ryan, I love you, pal. I was telling his dad about the next new hot drug that's supposed to get us off of drugs, right? And he looks at me and he says, you know what, Ian? At some point, you just have to stop. And I remember thinking, it's not that simple, man. But maybe it is. Maybe it is. looking back on all this, it was horrific, man. These visions, these dreams, whatever happened, it was the scariest experience I've ever had in my life. It was horrific, man. It was terrifying. You know, looking back, I felt that Western medicine had failed me. They gave me Suboxone. I felt like the treatment didn't work, even though the only time I've successfully been fully abstinent from drugs for a long period of time was after a long-term inpatient stint. The Ibogaine did something to me where I became addicted to it in a way, and I had a couple people around me try to call me out. Like, man, Ian, you've gone off the deep end with this. That's great that you're off of the opiates, but to be honest, we didn't mind you on the Suboxone. We didn't even know you were on it. You were just Ian, right? It was me that was continually seeking the next thing. And when this Ibogaine thing hit me, I wasn't able to just leave this behind and walk away and be like, damn, I almost died. I had to go get fully involved in it. Dove head first into the deep end. I was more stable than I'd ever been in my life, in a way. Like 2 years post Ibogaine, I had a job, I had my own place, healthy relationship with my girlfriend, playing music, acquiring instruments, taking piano lessons. I was financially stable, more so than I'd ever been. And it wasn't enough, man. I had to go down to Mexico and get all wrapped up in the Ibogaine world. And I did honestly feel like I was doing a good thing. Looking back, I just really wish that I would have had some type of strong male figure in my life to call bullshit on this. Wish I would have had a dad. That's kind of what it all comes back to, right? And I think that's what all of this drug stuff with me and all of this seeking comes back to, was simply me not having had my father growing up. And so that's why I want to get this information out here and just get my experience out there. I have a kid now, and I don't want him to have to go through any of this nonsense. None of it. So I'm hoping this is educational, because I don't wish this hell on anybody, man. Do I regret it? Hell yes. I regret all of it. I wish I didn't have to go through all this addiction and shady alternative treatments like Ibogaine and lose my mind. Are you kidding me? So, alright. That's it, man. 15 years post Ibogaine, and I'm alive. I'm a father, I'm a musician, I'm a cook, and trying to be a storyteller. I'm starting to back off on the videos a little bit because I'm putting a lot more effort into writing. I intend to publish my book. So, yeah, any questions about Ibogaine or any experiences I had, throw it down in the comments. Much love, everybody.